broader understanding of philanthropy can help us gain a broader donor database in our fundraising strategies. Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the Fundraising School, and I'm joined today by two of my faculty colleagues at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, Dr. Kathy Boticher and Dr. Shar Siddiq. Kathy leads our master's program and co-leads our doctoral program while teaching a range of graduate level courses in our school. And Shar leads the Muslim Philanthropy Initiative along with his scholarship, research, and teaching. And Kathy and Shar, thanks so much for being with us. You are the co-authors of Chapter 10, Fundraising for Advocacy and Social Change. And Shar, first of all, this whole idea that philanthropy is more than fundraising. What do we mean when we discuss that with our students and our fundraising school participants?
Sure. So if you think about it, philanthropy is about trying to make the world a better, or our perception of what the world should look like. And part of that is, and fundraising is simply a tool to achieve that outcome. But advocacy, social change, those are the big things that actually drive the reason why we have fundraising, right? People give money because there's a cause associated with that. And social change, advocacy movements are in many ways the cause, the reason why people want to sort of engage in philanthropy. And so philanthropy is far broader than just money, right? It's about time, it's treasure, but it's about voice. It's about intentionality. And I would argue as a Muslim, it's also smiling, right? So philanthropy goes much broader, but all of these things combined help us as to become better fundraisers.
And Kathy, this is something you've seen as a resident historian throughout history. Philanthropy aimed at social change with people volunteering their voices even before they're raising money for their cause.
Absolutely. History tells us a lot about institutions that we take for granted today began as some person's idea. So everything has a history, has an origin story. And so many nonprofits, many movements, not just the two that Shark and I care so deeply about, but started with a vision, some individual person's moral imagination, which then coalesced around a group of people, maybe brewed into a formal nonprofit organization. And in order for something to gain traction, it needs resources. The cause needs resources. So all these movements are intimately connected with fundraising.
And as many people as there are, there can be social movements. As Kathy said, we all have our moral imagination, how we want to see the world a better place. And what our co-authors have done in Chapter 10 of Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, the 5th edition that's been released in 2022, is highlight two specific examples that can help us see the broader story, to see your nonprofit, to see your social movement. And Shark, as you lead the Muslim Philanthropy Initiative, you gave us great insight into the topic of social advocacy to combat Islamophobia. What lessons can we learn from that movement as we think about fundraising for advocacy and social change?
Sure. I think one of the first lessons, I think, is that everybody can be part of our database, right? Far too often when we as fundraisers look at our databases, we say, who's there, right? And then we try to figure out who are the wealthy people that aren't there. And I think the Islamophobia example or the Muslim American example suggests that people that are marginalized, people that may not be as wealthy, have a part to play within the equation of fundraising. So, and the reality is diversity, equity, and inclusive fundraising far too often has to rely upon history, because history provides the data that potentially empirical empirical data doesn't. And Kathy is a better expert at this than I am. The two examples I'll give from the chapter that I think are really sort of speak to this. One is the story of enslaved women during the times of slavery, right? These women had no money or income, but they had agency. And despite being enslaved women, they found ways in which to make the plantation a better place for children, right? So imagine if today as fundraisers, we were to think about not just the very shiny sort of people that we can identify, but we think about broadly our mission, then think about all the voices and all the people that can be part of it. And then we trace back what are the reasons why they're not part of that? And part of that may be their historical experiences of being part of movements, being part of nonprofits. And our job as fundraisers is to sort of lead that change within our institution to make sure that our conversations, our narratives, and our engagement tools engage with those people in their terms. And so I think the Islamophobia examples, if you are engaging with Muslims, you have to understand their history, which is hundreds of years long in this country. You have to understand the challenges that they face in this country today. And based on that narrative, you can engage with this group of people. Because if you just go to them and say, look, this is the shiny cause that I have, and this is why you should do it, that's a transactional approach, right? That's selling candy. But we don't sell candy. We engage with people and walk together. And so that's why the Islamophobia example is a really great one, because I think it allows us to understand a group of people that are wanting to give, wanting to be engaged, but they're looking for someone to understand who they are.
And Kathy, how have you seen this play out in the social cause of combating domestic violence?
I think what Sharik just said also teaches us a lot about social movements in general, and the cause that I devote a lot of my personal philanthropic time, talent, treasure, and testimony to is combating domestic violence. One is the point of agency that, as one of the pioneer women's studies scholars, Ann Scott, said, we have to make the invisible visible. And so for both of us and for a number of contemporary social movements, what we're talking about is giving agency to someone who's been oppressed, silenced, who is invisible. And so in the 1970s, when the domestic violence movement emerged on the heels of women's rights movement, someone recognized that here is a community and communities of women across the world who had been silenced. They have no resources, they don't have agency. And one of the things that is particularly interesting in this trajectory was how taboo the topic was. And I think that crosses not only both of our topics, but a lot of social movements. And so the founders of organizations had to look for ways to connect with potential donors' value systems, because what we're always talking about in fundraising is values exchanges. And sometimes that message, protecting abused women, resonated. And sometimes, especially with institutional funders, it did not resonate at all. It terrified them because this is way too radical. This is extreme. This is not ever going to go anywhere. This is a private matter. And so the messaging evolved over time. And I think we're seeing that in a lot of DEI movements, and we see it with Islamophobia, with institutional funders selecting in or out based on how risky they think that this venture is. So I have said before in podcasts, know your audience. And I think that sometimes these movements in their fragile stages have to be chameleons almost, and connect with donors as appropriate, because this domestic violence is something we should all care about. It doesn't just affect the woman who's being abused or controlled or silenced. It affects all of our communities. And the same is true with Islamophobia. Somebody might say, I'm not in this, I don't have a stake in this, but we all care, right?
And to put some context into that comment about chameleons, our academic students, our fundraising school participants know the context of that comment is to be adaptable to the donor. Exactly. I know for some folks that can have a negative connotation in our culture that you're not being sincere to yourself or the other person. In this case, it is meant to be able to adapt to your environment, adapt to the situation, meet the potential donor where they're at. And as I conclude with this question for both of you, Sharik, when you talked about social advocacy against Islamophobia, part of the context of your reply was to make sure we're being inclusive across our donor database and not leave people out if they don't look like me, or I think they might not think like me, folks who've been marginalized in our country for many, many decades, centuries, years. What about just kind of translating that to the broader donor database? For somebody who is not Muslim, but still cares about fighting against Islamophobia. How does advocacy for social change translate into fundraising in that regard?
Absolutely. So, as Kathy said, people care about the world being a better place, right? So you may not be Muslim, but you still don't want America to be a bigoted and racist place, because that impacts my children going to school. And so far too often, when I go to Muslim organizations that are fighting Islamophobia, one of the things that are part of our TFRS trainings, one of the things I point to them is that you're not looking at people that believe in civil rights, that believe in fighting against bigotry in this country. And what is your narrative to them? Because if you're just going to go and say Islamophobia is a Muslim problem, right, you're only going to engage Muslim donors. But if you say Islamophobia is an American civil rights problem, you're suddenly engaging a broader database. Now you have to have different strategies. And once you put that into your constituency circle based on your case for support, then your constituency circle is now expanded. Then you have to create different narratives to engage with those different people. But that's one of the things I think we have to think about the problem in terms of a broader case for support.
And Kathy, similarly, if I have not experienced domestic violence personally or in my household, there are people who will attend the march, attend the demonstration, organize to advocate for changes in law and public policy. And all of those are important in and of themselves. And if that's what people do, that's philanthropy. However, how can that potentially translate into new donors, into fundraising planning?
I think with a lot of the movements that not just the two that we're talking about today, but a lot of movements involve the combination of service delivery of some type, as well as this cultural shift in education that we aspire to. And so there's a place for donors across that spectrum. And I think that's a message that people can come away with. So for example, with domestic violence, the women who founded the movement realized that they had to create safe places. And so the shelter system emerged along with advocacy, really in lockstep. And so we have, in the organizations that I represent personally, we have donors who really want to take care of the physical place, because what they just can't fathom is someone being physically, mentally, spiritually unsafe in their own home. And so taking care of the place resonates with them. And then other people who really want to advocate for, as you say, sometimes laws have to be changed, and that's part of these movements. Some people really want to bring their voice and go talk to school groups or to other constituencies to build coalitions and build future donors that way. So I think if we think of social justice as at least those two components, service and voice, then everyone finds something that resonates with them potentially.
And we know from the research that folks who volunteer are more likely to become donors to our nonprofit organization, that volunteering can include various activities associated with social advocacy. And then, of course, there are those ripple effects when the demonstration reaches the news, when the public policy movement reaches the news. Well, those folks have just done you a favor. They've exposed our neighbors to this story, and that can help us meet new potential donors as well. Again, emphasizing that the social advocacy in and of itself is uniquely important and influential and a strong form of philanthropy. And one thing about achieving excellence for fundraising, edition number 5, is that these themes are not just contained to chapter 10, as awesome as chapter 10 is, thanks to my two colleagues. These themes are infused through every single chapter. All 39 chapters, all of the authors and co-authors were instructed to include themes associated with leading through a crisis, COVID-19, and those effects, which you guys touch on in your chapter as well, very directly, as well as incorporating themes of social justice through each and every chapter. That's a big distinction in this 5th edition, which is available on our website, along with information about the Fundraising School's public courses, which are in person across the United States, more and more cities all the time, but still robustly online, both in recorded versions and live versions, which of course are easily accessible around the world, as is our custom training. We can still get on a plane and travel across anywhere around the world, as my colleague, Dr. Sadiq, does so well and so often. We can also join you online with our custom training, customized and tailored just for you. We have our quarterly webinars and these weekly podcasts, and of course, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, edition number 5, all on our website at philanthropy.iupui.edu. And look across the top toolbar, you'll see professional development. That's where you will find the fundraising school. Also on that website, you're going to find information about our master's degree and about our doctoral degrees. And these are the types of conversations we have in our academic classrooms that help strengthen your leadership in the philanthropic sector. Philanthropy.iupui.edu. Our producers today are Mike Anthony and Jennifer Boffman. I'm so grateful for my colleagues, Dr. Sharik Sadiq and Dr. Kathy Bodicher. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, and now you are now more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.